So on Friday, Tiffany and I went to the doctor to see my neurosurgeon, and the coolest thing ever, I found out that they very well may wake me up in the middle of the surgery. I said, if you wake me up in the middle of that surgery, I'm going to start saying, I've got a hole in my head. And she really laughed. She really laughed boisterously, and then she said, no, don't do that. So I won't do that. But I just thought that was funny. So we'll see if that happens and if I remember it. But I thought that'd be a really cool story to be able to say, I woke up when they were looking at my brain. Yeah, so that'd be pretty neat. But I don't know when it's going to happen. I thought I was going to find out when the surgery date was on Friday, but I didn't. So hopefully I'll find out tomorrow. We'll see. Who knows? Just got to wait, right? Hey, if you want a note sheet, raise your hand and someone will bring that to you. So when we go to Trek, and for those of you who are visitors, Trek is like a summer church camp in the mountains of Colorado, and everything we need for church camp is carried in packs on our backs, and we hike up the mountain, and we do a lot of incredible things. We do rappelling off of the sides of cliffs, and we climb some of the highest peaks in Colorado. Just an incredible week. But now for first-time trekkers, for kids and adults for whom this is the first time they've ever done some of these things, the first time they've rappelled, the first time they've carried a pack, the first time they've hiked at that high altitude, it can be kind of daunting. It's a scary prospect to hike up mountains in Colorado. Now, one thing that is often said to these newcomers is, many people have done this before. Many people have done this before. As they're sitting there and they're getting hooked up to the rope and they're thinking about, I don't know if I can do this. The guide is telling them, I've seen 1,000 people go over this cliff. You know how many people have gone over this cliff since it began 3 decades ago? Thousands upon thousands of people have gone over this cliff since it began 3 decades ago, and you can do this too. You can do this too. That's a common theme at Trek, and it's actually a common theme in my life, and I'm sure it's a common theme in your life as you look at the people around you that have been walking this path a little bit longer than you have. How many times have you looked at somebody? I don't want to embarrass anybody. I could embarrass people, but I don't want to embarrass you today by naming names. But you can look around this room and you see people who have lived inspiring lives, people who have walked faithfully, people who have been missionaries, people who have welcomed people into their homes, people who have faced illnesses just it inspires us. We have all seen people like that. People who have shown a determination that is inspiring. Right? We've all seen people like that. And when we look at people like that, we think, if they can do it, if by God's grace and power they can make it, then I can make it too. We see people who have left behind addictions, and we think, if they can do it by God's grace and power, then I can do it too. We see people who say, I used to be one of the angriest people around, and now God has helped me so much. And we say, well, if they can do it by God's grace and power, then I can do it too. That's a common theme for all of us. And that's actually going to lead us to something new we're going to be doing. This is a song I heard this past week, and it inspired me. It's a song by Sarah Groves, and I don't know if I've ever heard it before. I think the song is quite old. I don't know, but this song just inspired me. I want to read these words to you. It says, Lord, it's all that I can't carry and cannot leave behind. It often overwhelms me. But when I think of all who've gone before and lived the faithful life, their courage compels me. And when I'm weary and overwrought with so many battles left unfought, I think of Paul and Silas in the prison yard. I hear their song of freedom rising to the stars, and when the saints go marching in, I want to be one of them. So our new series is, I want to be one of them. I want us to consider some of these stories of these saints who have walked this path before us. And as we consider their stories, I hope that we are inspired, and I hope that we are challenged. And I hope that we can recognize that these saints that have walked this faithful path before us, they have kept their eyes on the one who is faithful, the one who is worthy of trust, the one who always comes through when His people put their trust and faith in Him. And so I want us to be inspired by these people who have put their trust in Him, and I want us to be challenged by their lives. And so we're going to begin by telling the story of Paul and Silas, the story that she mentions in that song. How many of you know the story? Paul and Silas, they find themselves in Philippi in a jail cell. And famously, they're singing. About midnight, they're singing. They're in jail. Now, they're not just in jail. They're not just in some holding cell somewhere. They're in the depths of this prison. They're in the inner cell, it says. Can you imagine this place? It's dark, dank, musty, just a dirty place. Who knows how many people have died in there? Who knows how many people have been beaten there and their blood was left on the floor? It's a nasty place. And on top of that, just the atmosphere of the place, how awful it is, they're tied up in stocks. A wooden device that's used to spread their legs apart. And so they're extremely uncomfortable in an awfully dirty, nasty place. And they don't know how long they're going to be there. We know the story, right? So we just think, oh, one night, right? One night's not bad. I can handle one night in that place. But they don't know how long they're going to be there. They don't know if it's going to be one night and they're going to be killed the next day. They don't know if it's going to be 1,000 nights. They have no idea how long they're going to be there. And yet they're singing. This song, this word that says they're singing, says they were praying, and it's a verb for the word hymn. They were hymning. They were praying and hymning. And it's a word that refers to songs of praise and even celebration. I don't know how celebratory those songs sounded that night. But whatever they were doing, it was catching the attention of the other prisoners because all the other prisoners were listening to them. So I have a question for you. Why were they able to sing? Why were they able to sing? As they sat in that prison cell, in that awful situation, painful, no idea how long they were going to be there, why were they able to sing in that place? To understand that, we're going to have to go back. We're going to have to go back and hear how this whole journey began and how they ended up in that jail cell. So I want to hop back as they enter into what is now modern day Turkey. If you can imagine, everybody knows what Turkey looks like now. It's that little peninsula right here, and there's the Mediterranean Sea down here, and then the Black Sea is up there above it. Everybody recognize that from your maps? Just picture it in your mind. It's something like that. So if you don't recognize it, there's land right here and water on either side. And so they are coming from the Middle East, and they're walking up from the south, and they come into southern modern Turkey. In your Bible maps, it'll call it Asia Minor. And they're making their way through this, and they go through Derby, and they come to a town called Lystra. And in Lystra, they find a young disciple named Timothy. So up to this point, it appears that it was just Paul and Silas traveling by themselves. But Timothy had been converted at some point, either in Paul's first missionary journey or sometime since then. And he had such a good name that Paul said, hey, we want this guy with us. We want this guy with us. And so he started coming along. So they're in Lystra, and they start making plans. They want to go west into Asia. Now you're thinking, if you know your geography, you're thinking, Asia's not west from Turkey, Asia's east. But back then, Asia wasn't this big continent. Asia was a little province here in the western part of what is modern day Turkey. So they're in the central part of Turkey, and they're saying, let's go west into Asia. That's their plans. Now, how many of you make plans? We have any planners in here? Any people like to make plans? I'm not a big planner myself. My wife is a big planner, and I have been blessed by her planning, but I'm not a big planner myself. I think if I know what's going to happen tomorrow, I'm really seeing far ahead. But some of you I know are different. But now the thing I do know about plans is that rarely do they work out exactly the way you were hoping. Right? Rarely do the plans come together exactly the way you're hoping. But Paul and Silas and Timothy, they've got plans. They've got plans. Now, what we're going to see here, we're going to start getting our first insight into what made them able to sing in that jail cell months later. And I think this was months later, they're going to find themselves in Philippi. But right now, they're in central modern-day Turkey, wanting to go west into Asia. And something happens. It says they were kept by the Holy Spirit from going into Asia. We don't know what that means. We don't know how that happened. How did they discern that? I don't know. Maybe the door was shut and they just perceived the Holy Spirit saying, don't go. We don't know. Maybe some prophet in one of the churches said, you shouldn't go into Asia. And maybe they had some sort of inner sense. We don't know what it means, but it says the Holy Spirit kept them. One way or another, they felt that God was saying, don't go into Asia. And so their plans dropped by the wayside. And so then what they did, and this is interesting, just a kind of a little side note, they traveled around in Phrygia and Galatia, and we don't know anything else. It says that they traveled around in Phrygia and Galatia, but they obviously did a lot in Phrygia and Galatia because the book of Galatians was written to the churches in Galatia. So Luke just kind of, all these churches that were planted in this time, Luke just kind of passes right over that. And it's kind of interesting. But as they were traveling around in Phrygia and Galatia, then they start going north. And they want to go into a place called Bithynia. Bithynia is on the southern shore of, if you see our map up here, on the southern shore of the Black Sea. So they have a new plan now. They've been walking around, they've been serving. New plan, let's go to Bithynia. God said don't go to Asia, so let's go to Bithynia. But it says now the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to go to Bithynia. And so, interesting. He keeps telling them, don't go where you're planning to go. And they keep working and say, well, let's go here now. No, don't go there. Well, let's go here now. No, don't go there. And what we see here in them is an openness and an ease and a readiness to just go with wherever God is leading them. Even if that means their plans are falling by the wayside. What we kind of see is that their plans are just kind of means for walking forward as they're watching for where God is leading them. So here's something we learned from them. One of the first lessons I want us to get is that they were able to accept something different than what they anticipated. They were able to accept something different than what they anticipated. Now, if I asked you this morning, please do not raise your hand, but if I asked you, how many of you have a 5-year plan? Some of you know, some of you can say, hey, in 5 years, I want to be doing this, right? People have asked me that question many times throughout my life, and I honestly have never understood how do I answer that question. Basically, I say, I hope I'm alive, and beyond that, I don't know what else to tell you, what I'm going to be doing in 5 years. I don't have 5-year plans, and so I don't understand that mentality a lot. Now, I want to be very clear. It is not wrong to have a 5-year plan. Everybody understand that? It's okay for you to have 5-year plans. Some of you, that's great for you. But I will say this. For those of you that love your 5-year plans, I imagine flexibility might be a struggle. Is that fair to say? If you just really think in 5 years, I'm going to be here, then you might have a little bit of struggle with just being okay with wherever God takes you. But this really is a struggle for all of us. Not just people that like 5-year plans. And I think that what we all need to realize is maybe the reason, listen to this, maybe the reason that some of us never really feel or rarely feel that we are where God is doing something incredible is because we don't readily submit to Him taking us somewhere different than where we plan to be. Does that make sense? And so we're always showing up where we're working where we want to go, and when that doesn't work out, we just sit and pout. And then we say, why isn't God ever wherever I am? It might be because we're not willing to go where He's taking us. We're not willing to just let go and say, okay, well, that didn't work out. I was hoping by now I'd be a millionaire. I'm not. So I'm not going to sit and pout about that. I'm going to do something different, right? I'm going to be okay. I'm going to just readily submit to being where He is now, where He has brought me now. I'm going to be calm. I'm going to be peaceful in this place when my plans don't work out. And so Paul and Silas and Timothy, they were able to accept that what was happening was good and that God was in control and that He was still working and He was doing something in spite of the fact that their plans were not working. And so they go 180 degrees. So Bithynia is this way to the east, and they go 180 degrees opposite the other way to Troas, which is down on the coast of the Aegean Sea. So they're over here down the coast of the Aegean Sea, and in Troas they meet up with Luke. Now everybody, you need to know, Luke wrote the book of Acts. He also wrote the Gospel of Luke, but he wrote the book of Acts. And what is really cool is that in Luke we see these Luke going back and forth between saying, Paul and Silas did this, and they did that, and Paul and Barnabas did this, and then every once in a while, in the narrative, Luke will say, and then we did this. And so we know at some point, Luke joins up with them. And so we find that Paul and Silas and Timothy have traveled down to Troas, and then we're going to see Luke start saying, and we did this. So Luke now is going to be with them. So there's a group of 4 of them. It's Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Luke. Now, Paul has a vision one night. Paul has a vision. Now, you need to understand that Troas is there on the coast of the Aegean Sea, and on the opposite shore, on the other side of the Aegean Sea, is what is modern-day Greece, right? Back then, it was Achaia, that little peninsula, and Macedonia toward the top. Now, Paul has a vision one night. He's sitting there, and what he sees in this vision is, on the other side of the shore, he sees a man in Macedonia saying, come over here to Macedonia and help us. Right? So it says that he got up in the morning, he told them about this, and they all concluded that God was leading them to go preach the gospel in Macedonia. Now here's what I want you to get from this. What I want us all to see is they did not treat prophecies with contempt. They did not treat prophecies with contempt. Let me try to unpack that, what I mean by that. It might seem like an odd thing for me to say nowadays, right? Let me try to tell you where I'm going with this. Luke could have said, now, Paul, I've been here for several months, and you need to understand that it's impossible to see anybody standing on the shore. That's just kind of a ridiculous idea to think you could see somebody on the shore of Macedonia over there. That's a ridiculous way. God would not lead us in something as ridiculous as that. So let's keep waiting and see where he wants us to go. Luke didn't do that. He didn't treat this with contempt. Actually, what they did was what Paul encouraged the Thessalonians to do. 1 Thessalonians, write this reference down in your notes. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 19 through 22. Paul tells them, do not quench the spirit. Do not treat prophecies with contempt, but test them all. Hold on to what's good and reject every kind of evil. So Paul is telling them, when you receive a prophecy, you're not supposed to go, that's crazy talk. No. God would never do that. God would never talk to us like that. We're not supposed to do that. What we're supposed to say is, I wonder what there could be to that. Let's test it. Would God want us to preach the gospel in Macedonia? Well, he wants us to preach the gospel for sure. Well, let's go over there and see. Let's go see if that's where he's calling us. That's what they did. I believe that's what we're supposed to still do. I believe even now when someone says, I really believe God is leading us to do this, that's what we're still supposed to do. Well, let's see. Is it a good thing? Does it fit in the general call that God has given us? And if it has, then let's walk forward into it and let's see if he confirms that or not. I think that's a good way to do it. It doesn't seem to be out of line with what God would expect. Now, and with what God would do. Now, one of the reasons, let me just park here briefly. One of the reasons why this is a struggle for some of us struggle with this idea of God leading us, right? I'm going to give you 2 reasons why I think there's a struggle real quick. One is we only think about this as it concerns our personal concerns. So sometimes when we think about God's will for our lives, we think about, where am I supposed to go to college? Who am I supposed to marry? What kind of job am I supposed to have? Am I supposed to buy that house? Am I supposed to buy that car? And that's the kind of God's will we're trying to discern. But if we aren't learning anything here, what they were trying to discern was God's will as it involved them in God's mission. You see the difference? Now, I'm not saying God doesn't care where you go to college. I'm not saying that he might not give you some sort of guidance on who you marry and what kind of job you have. I will say this. If you're seeking God's will between this 2019 Ford pickup and this 2019 Chevy pickup, the leading might not be as forthcoming as it is for his mission. Does that make sense? That makes sense? And so this, I think, is one of the reasons why we get all hung up on this. Well, he never told me which truck to buy. Well, maybe he didn't. But he might tell you where to go to serve him. That makes sense? Another reason why I think we get hung up on this is some of us, we think it sounds really, really spiritual, and we'll say, I don't want to walk one step without the Lord. And what that means is, I'm going to sit down right here, and I'm going to wait. I'm not going to do anything until he shows me what to do. That's spiritual, right? No, that's not spiritual. That's just, I think laziness. But what we see them doing is they keep saying, let's go over there. And then God says, no, don't go there. Okay, well, let's go around here for a while. Hey, let's go over there. No, don't go there. Okay, well, let's go. They were moving. And it was in their movement that they perceived God's will for where to go. So this is what I believe we are supposed to do, be involved in God's mission, moving. If it's a good thing and you think, hey, I wonder if we're supposed to do that. Well, just walk forward in it. And if you're not supposed to do it, then He'll kind of shut it off at some point. He'll redirect you at some point. But if you're supposed to do it, He'll keep opening the doors and you'll find confirmation that that's what you're supposed to do. Test every prophecy. Keep what is good. Reject every kind of evil. I'm going to tell y'all a story because this is just way cool. This is way cool. One of my friends, I'm not going to use any names because some of this is going to go on the internet, but one of my friends, it's a couple, they're missionaries overseas. They have a friend who grew up as a Muslim. And this person was converted to Christianity at some point in their life. And I don't know that backstory, but now she is a Christian. Her father was an imam, one of the biggest, apparently one of the biggest imams in the country where she grew up, right? When she became a Christian, he started persecuting her, and there had been attempts on her life, and so she moved to another country where my friends are now. Now, here's where it gets extremely cool, abundantly incredible. Now, this lady, she took 2 people with her because she speaks Arabic. She speaks Arabic fluently, and so because she grew up in this faith, learning from the Quran as she was growing up, and so she decided she felt a call to go where ISIS was. Whew! Exciting stuff. So she goes to where ISIS is in Iraq. Takes these 2 friends with her. And what they're doing is, all day long, they're just reading the New Testament in Arabic. And people are just not letting them rest because they want to hear. She eventually starts tearing out pages of her Bible, and she'll give them to a family, and they'll go home and they'll read it all night. They'll come back the next day and they'll exchange it. This is an incredible thing, right? One day, ISIS shows up. Kills one of her friends. Now, guys, this is not some distant story. This is my friend who knows this girl, right? So, I mean, there's a little bit of disconnect there, but it's not like it's like my friend who had a friend who had a friend. I mean, this is real close. This ISIS comes, one of her friends is killed. Later that exact same day, the killer returns to where she is and is looking for her. He comes to her and he says, I've had a vision of a man named Jesus, and you need to tell me about him. You tell me God doesn't still do that? Well, they would say something different. And so my friend told me that what this lady was I mean, she was filled with rage, and she was battling with Jesus the whole time, kind of like Ananias, who preached to Paul. Is that right? Yeah, I had it right, man. So it's the brain tumor. Can I blame it on that? So, okay. So she was battling with Jesus. I don't want to do this. I don't want to tell this guy this. He just killed my friend just today. Well, the guy from ISIS became a Christian that very day and said, I'm going to go back and tell the people in ISIS about Jesus. Wow. You tell me Jesus isn't working? He's doing incredible things. He still does that kind of stuff, especially as we're on mission. Does that make sense? Wow. Beautiful stuff. Okay, so let's continue on. So they make their way to Philippi. Philippi, as they travel across the Aegean Sea, and Philippi is the first big city they come to. They land on the coast, and Philippi is about 10 or 12 miles in, and so they come to Philippi. Philippi was this Roman colony. How many of you remember Caesar Augustus? Anybody remember him? Before he was Augustus, he was, anybody remember? Octavian. And Octavian and Antony were fighting against Brutus and Cassius. Brutus and Cassius had killed Julius Caesar, remember? It's all coming back to you. You remember all this. And so they had a big battle, right outside of Philippi, where Octavian won. And so in honor of his victory, he made Philippi a Roman colony, and then started sending Roman soldiers who were retiring to be there in Philippi. And so when Paul gets there, it's a Roman colony. They have special privileges because they're Roman citizens. We'll see that plays into the story later. Actually, I'm not going to be able to get to that part of the story today, but that plays into the story later. So you should read all of Acts chapter 16 today. But they come into Philippi, and there's no synagogue here. Now, if you know anything about Paul's missionary work, he always would go to the synagogues first. The synagogues were where the Jews met. And so he would always go to these synagogues first and preach to the Jews first, and then after that he would go to the Gentiles. Well, there's no synagogue here. And what this means is there's not 10 Jewish men in that city. There's not 10 Jewish men in that city. Because if they had 10 men, they would have a synagogue. Now, if they had 9 men and 1,000 women who were Jews, they couldn't have a synagogue. No number of women can make up for the one missing man. Does that offend anybody else? Yeah, it offends me. No number of women can make up for one missing man. And yet Paul and Timothy and Silas and Luke walked out of that city because they heard there was a place of prayer out by the river. And they walked outside that city, about a mile outside of the city, and they found a group of women who were there praying. Jews, Jewish women, and Gentile women who had been converted. God-fearers, they were called. And they preached the gospel to those women. You know why? Because 1,000 women might not be able to make a synagogue, but one woman and her family could make a church. Isn't that beautiful? Anybody, let me just tell you something on the side, little side note here. If anybody ever says to you that Christianity is about the subjugation of women and the disrespect of women and the enslavement of women, we can acknowledge that there have been abuses along the way and oppression along the way, but from the beginning it was not so. From the beginning, women were honored as full members. Some people say that Lydia, the one who responded here, Lydia was the first Christian in Europe. Now, if that's true, that's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible. And so God, He cared greatly about that. And I want you to imagine what has just happened. This has been a months-long process. A months-long process where God took these, began with Paul and Silas and Timothy. They were way over in Central Asia Minor. And He guided their steps for months and brought them to this riverside on this day so that Lydia could hear the message. Isn't that incredible? What an incredible God we have. All that time out, He was working to bring this about. That's just so beautiful to me. It's inspiring, and it's inspiring that they walked that path so completely, so faithfully. And what we learned from them is that the mission of telling people about Jesus was paramount. They had traveled over land and sea in order to be able to give this simple message that Jesus is Lord, and if you believe in Him, you can be saved. They traveled over land and sea to give that simple message, and Lydia responded to it. It says that the Lord opened her heart to the message. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. This challenges me. Does this challenge you? The idea that this mission of telling people about Jesus should be the biggest thing in our lives. There should be nothing else that ranks higher than this. As we look at Paul and his companions, this is something that should inspire us and should challenge us. And so, things are going well for them. Things have gone well. The call has been confirmed now, right? But they thought that they had been called across the sea, and so they go across the sea. Lydia and her family respond. The call is confirmed. They're where God wants them to be. And so now they're going back and forth. We don't know how long they were there exactly, and we don't know how many days they were going back, but one day they were going back out to the river again, and there's this slave girl who was possessed by a demon who keeps coming to Paul day after day after day, and she is just crying out after them. She's saying, "These men are from the God Most High, and they're telling you the way of salvation." Now, we don't know why a demon was saying this and don't have time to really get into all that, but just to cut to the chase, Paul eventually gets annoyed with that and casts the demon out. Now, the slave girl was owned, as slaves are, by some men. And these men used her to make money because when she was possessed by this demon, she would be able to predict the future, or at least tell people their fortunes, and people would pay for it. Now, when Paul cast the demon out, it says that their profits were cast out. That's what the Greek says. Paul cast out the demon, and when they saw that their profits had been cast out, they got angry. Now, this is interesting. There's only 2 places in the entire book of Acts where the persecution that takes place is due to the Gentiles. Most of the time, it's Jews causing problems for Paul and his companions. But here, and in one other place, it's about the Gentiles. And you know, the only 2 times that Gentiles persecuted the church in the book of Acts was when they messed with their money. Interesting. You mess with people's money and things get messed up. I'm willing to let you do a lot of stuff, but you start messing with my money and I'm going to take you to jail. And that's exactly what they did. So they took him, and through a series of events, Paul and Silas were thrown into prison. Now, we didn't get to talk about every aspect of that story. You should go back and read the whole thing. But now perhaps we are able to answer why they were able to sing. As they were in that jail cell, they were able to say, God is in this moment. God is using this moment. They were able to say, they were able to accept things that they had not anticipated. What had they anticipated? What were they doing? What were their plans? Well, they were going out to the river again. They were going out there to preach again. But not today. No, today you're going to jail. Well, okay. God's using this moment too. God's using this moment too. And they were able to recall their call to that place. As they sat in that jail cell, I'm sure they were able to remember, God called us here. And He confirmed that call when Lydia and her family responded. And so we're not here by accident. It's not like this took God by surprise. He knew this was going to happen. He knew we were going to end up in jail. So, yeah. Now, just those 2 things right there by themselves should make them able to sing. Should make them able to praise God. Because they still realize God is in this moment. He is using this moment. And He has called us here. But it goes even more than that. They were still on mission. As they were sitting in that jail cell, they had not forgotten about their mission. And you know how we know this? Because an earthquake came and the chains fell off. The doors opened. Quite miraculously, all of this happened. And what did they do? They stayed right there. Anybody in their quote-unquote right mind would have ran, right? Anybody in their human mind would have said, this is my opportunity. I got to get out of here. I'll try to find the jailer later. But no, Paul and Silas said, we're still on mission. We still have a job right here. I want you to imagine in the dark of that cell, maybe there's a torch burning outside in the holding area where the jailer is. And so Paul can dimly see what's going on out there. The doors have opened. The noise from the earthquake has now subsided. It's all quiet. And Paul hears a sword being pulled out of its sheath. And Paul knows what that means. Paul knows what that means for any man of honor who has failed in his duty. What he's supposed to do is kill himself. That's more honorable than to fail in your duty. So Paul knows that's what this man is about to do. And Paul understands he has a mission to that man that is more important than his own freedom. Wow. Paul has a mission to that man that is more important than anything that he could personally need. He is still on mission. He's still on mission. Now, if that can't make you sing in prison, I don't know what can. It's beautiful, right? And so the same with us. God is in this moment. Whatever reality you woke up to this morning, God is in this moment and God is using this moment. Every day of your life, whatever reality you wake up to, God is in this moment and God is using this moment. And He wants to use you in His mission. We need to be able to recall our call to this place. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we still look for and are sensitive to God's leading. But even when we don't have a specific call, if we're walking in His general call for us, if we're walking in the things that we know are good and right to do, then we need to feel confident we are where we need to be. And recall from that call, that's exactly what God wants us to do. A brief story, the Philippines mission trip had been planned for months. Started planning back in October. And the doors kept opening, the money came in, and everything was opening. And then the week before the trip, Emma, one of the people that was supposed to, over in the Philippines, one of the people that was supposed to be one of the primary guides for our group, she was struck by a motorcycle. And still, do we know how she's doing? She's doing okay now, but she was out of, we didn't know if she was even going to survive those first few days. But what we all decided was, God knew this was going to happen when He called us to this trip. God knew what was going to happen when He kept opening the doors to this trip. And so because that group recognized that God had already called them, they were able to say, God is still in this moment. And even though our plans are not working out the way we thought they would, we're going to still go forward. And so all of us need to also remember we are always on mission. We are always on mission. I'm going to end with a story about some Chinese Christians that Tiffany read about in a book. I have not read this book, but Tiffany would highly recommend it. It's called The Insanity of God by Nick Ripken. All right? The Insanity of God by Nick Ripken. That's a tongue twister. Well, he tells a story in this book about Chinese house leaders, house church leaders, right? There's a movement of Chinese house churches in China that's just phenomenal. I don't know just a lot, but just my experience was incredible with them. Anyway, these Chinese house church leaders were talking with Nick because he was trying to understand how is the church living in fullness under persecution throughout the world. So he's traveled all around the world talking to Christians in all these different places. And he said that these house church leaders say that the authorities in their cities will come to them and say to them, you must stop meeting in your house for this church thing. You cannot do that anymore. You must stop. And if you don't stop, we're going to take your house. We're going to take your farm. It's so funny how the Chinese, as Nick is talking to them, he said, what do y'all say in that kind of moment? So they said, well, if an authority tells us that we're going to take your house, we're going to take your farm, then we'll tell them, well, you need to talk to Jesus because we gave this house and this farm to Jesus. And so then the authorities would say something like, we can't get to Jesus, but we're going to take your house away and you're not going to have any place to go. And then the Christians would say, then we'll be free to trust God for shelter and for food. And he says, and then the authorities would say, listen, if you don't stop, then we're going to beat you. Well, then we would be free to trust Jesus for healing. And he says, well, if you don't stop, then we're going to put you in prison. Well, then we would be free to tell those people in prison about Jesus, and we'll plant churches in the prisons. Well, if you do that, we're going to kill you. Well, then I'll be free to go to heaven and be with Jesus forever. If that can't make a person sing in prison, what can? I want to be one of them. How about you? Why don't we stand? Why don't you come as we stand and sing?